Well, let's go to Catherine McGregor because there have been very significant international developments, including a recent speech by the Chinese leader Xi, where he left no doubt about his commitment to the ultimate incorporation of Taiwan into the People's Republic of China. But as the Wall Street Journal has argued earlier this week, it was what the Chinese president didn't say and the context in which he didn't say it that mattered most. To quote the Wall Street Journal, in a major speech commemorating the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party, delivered in Tiananmen Square in July, Xi promised to, quote, utterly defeat any attempt towards Taiwanese independence, unquote. In a letter congratulating Eric Chu on his election as leader of Taiwan's main opposition party, Xi called the situation on the island, quote, complex and grim. And over the weekend of China's October 1 National Day, as I've previously told you, 149 Beijing military aircraft crossed into the island's air defence identification zone. The Wall Street Journal made reference to the recent visit by Tony Abbott to Taiwan. Then a French senator visiting the island called Taiwan a country. Japan's incoming Prime Minister has announced that the long-time pro-Taiwan politician Nobuo Kishi will keep the defence portfolio in the new Japanese government. Let's go to Catherine McGregor to see what we should make of all of this. Catherine, thank you for your time again. A simple question. Is China as strong in its resolve as the rhetoric would suggest?
Absolutely, Alan. There is absolutely no doubt, regardless of the strength or weakness internally of Xi's regime, and I suspect he has a lot more problems than meet the eye, that there is an absolute determination on behalf of the CCP to reincorporate what they call the wayward province, and I believe they'll probably more than likely use military force to do that.
Well, as you know, the Global Times, which is virtually a mouthpiece of what you call the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has called the presence of US troops in Taiwan a red line that cannot be crossed, and warned that in the event of war in the Taiwan Straits, those military personnel will be the first to be eliminated. Now, Catherine, we've got a US President Joe Biden who can't remember Scott Morrison's name and doesn't know the difference between a telephone and a television, or the difference between Ohio and Pennsylvania. What would Biden and Xi talk about? Because they're meant to have a virtual summit in the northern autumn. Is this just a showpiece?
Well, this is one of the things that is missing from the equation at the moment, Alan, and that is, as bad as relations became at the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, there were mechanisms. For example, Bobby Kennedy had direct access to the foreign ministry of the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm very worried that there's no dialogue, and that certainly there won't be much of a dialogue between Xi and Biden, especially in the state that he appears to be in. Yes. But there are no mechanisms for diffusing tensions currently, and that is regrettable. And it does mean that there's enormous risk for miscalculation.
No, yeah, absolutely. Can I just come back to those words you used earlier, though? You said notwithstanding the internal problems that Xi has. Now, you've got this giant property developer, Evergrande, stumbling towards collapse. Many middle-class families invested their savings in China in Evergrande products. And as the Wall Street Journal argued, they now have to walk upstairs to their overpriced 10th floor apartment because the power is out. And as I've been saying, this is a massive energy crisis. There are blackouts across much of China. They've been forced to take on cargoes of our coal, which they previously banned. And as the Wall Street Journal says, it's all very well to threaten and insult Australia, but when your power stations across the Chinese Rust Belt run out of fuel, you need Australian coal to keep the lights on. Catherine, is it a different equation now that China may not have the economic muscle it would like?
Well, this is the worry, Alan. It's just very difficult to tell. Every problem you just nominated is real, and there are more. They are spending enormous amounts of their money on surveillance and intrusive surveillance of their population. This is a sign of a regime bent on survival and that does feel threatened internally. That could make them more rash rather than less rash. That's the worry, because there has been a large element in Xi's behaviour of using external foes, imagined and real, to consolidate regime survival. But they've got some real problems. And another one they've got, they're getting older before they get rich. And the other thing that they have to contemplate in a cross-straits operation is that the Taiwanese know precisely which beaches they have to cross. They've been practicing defending them for 40 years. They will inflict horrific casualties on the PLA, no matter what leads into it. And the fact is, with a nation that has had a one-child policy privileging sons, you start sending those single sons of families home in body bags, and let's see what happens internally. I think there's a lot of risks for them.
I agree. I mean, just coming back to that last point, before we go, there's a population crisis there. I mean, more than 4 in 10 young urban women have said they want to remain single. Doubtful they'll ever marry. So there's a fall in birth rates. So Xi will have to rebalance a rapidly ageing population against whether that can be afforded. And the number of births last year, I think, fell by about 18%. So, Catherine, these are major issues on China's domestic front. Just before 100%. We go, this universal concern is that as its young population declines, the country will lack sufficient skilled labour to support its economy and the elderly population. So may Xi have too many problems internally to be able to carry out what he'd like to do and has threatened in relation to Taiwan?
Look, we can only hope so, Alan, and it's one of the reasons that Tony Abbott's clarion call in Taipei, that needs to be emulated right across the Indo-Pacific. We discussed it earlier today, that magnificent speech of Patrick Henry and Alexander Hamilton. A nation that prefers disgrace to danger is ready for a master. Now, the Taiwanese will fight, and they need to know they can rely on the West to stand by them, because there are internal contradictions and tensions within that regime, and placating them, their demands are insatiable. As Patrick Henry said, gentlemen may cry peace, but the war has actually begun. The next gale from the north shall bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. He said that on the eve of the American Revolution and said, give me liberty or give me death. And that's got to be the guiding light of our policymakers.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Catherine McGregor, wonderful. OK, stay warm down there, by the way. Stay warm. They're talking about tornadoes tonight. I said last night there wouldn't be.
I know.
So, grab an open fire.
Fire at Bowral, mate. With Tonya and Hunter and I can have a speech off. We'll have a speech off.
A speech off. Good on you, Catherine. There she is. We love it, don't we? They're important points, though, aren't they? China, Catherine McGregor.